The call came in on a Tuesday at 4:32 in the afternoon, late October. The sun already sliding behind the Blue Ridge, so the hollows of Shenandoah darkened early. Ranger Aislinn Keats was parked at mile marker 47 of Skyline Drive, just north of the Rapidan turnoff, a paper cup of station coffee cooling in the cup holder, and her radio tuned to the quiet channel they used for backcountry check-ins. The speaker breathed. Static arranged itself into a voice that did not sound like any of her crew. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Aislinn turned the volume wheel a notch. Out the windshield, the ridge was drawn in crosshatch, oaks and hickories going copper, the sky a pale thing you could scratch with your nail. The voice came again, precise, as if it were reading off a card. Fox Hollow Base to any unit on the east slope. Child missing. Male, age 8. Name Harlan Whitcomb. Last seen near the Old Stone Spring House above Corbin Run. Weather degenerating. Hurricane Hazel expected to push in, winds rising. Request all available. Time is 16:30, October 14, 1954. The radio clicked off into snow. Then, faintly, the same message, identical down to the breath before the name. Aislinn stared at the handset. Their base was called Piney River Dispatch. Their tower names were Pinnacles and Hazeltop and Big Meadows. No one in the park had used Fox Hollow for decades. Her training cracked its knuckles. She keyed the mic. Piney River to unknown unit. Say again. Who is calling Fox Hollow Base? Silence laid itself over the car like a thin blanket. Beyond the glass, a crow moved from one bear snag to another as if demonstrating a diagram. The wind was a steady push from the southeast. Hazel. The word gave the hairs on Aislinn's arms ideas. She stepped out and let the door swing shut. The air had that warm edge you get before a storm that started somewhere else. Leaves chased each other along the asphalt, then lay down. In the trunk lay her day pack, a spare radio, and a copy of a paper map creased along the places everyone folds them. She slung the pack, checked battery levels, turned the spare to scan. The main radio kept its sulk. The spare found chatter from Big Meadows about a flat tire near Lewis Mountain, then returned to quiet. The old voice did not return. Aislinn keyed in to dispatch. Piney, Keats at 47. I caught a transmission, sounds like a vintage call. Reference to Fox Hollow, child missing near Corbin Run, date October 14, 1954. Could someone check the archive on that, see if we have a historical incident report? The dispatcher was a steady woman named Karen, who did not make noises she did not need. Copy, Aislinn. Stand by. Aislinn leaned on the hood and looked east, where the hills tumbled like knuckles, all green and copper and shadow. She had worked Shenandoah 5 seasons. She knew the way the ridges spoke when you asked them right. She also knew radios lie sometimes, bouncing off ducts of temperature and skipping across layers of ionized air like stones. She had heard voices from fire towers that had been torn down before she was born, and a farmer yelling to his brother on a frequency no longer assigned to anyone. She had never heard a date pinned to a hurricane whose name lived in the county's memory like a scar. Karen came back. We have a typewritten Keats, Incident 1954-H, filed at Piney River. Hurricane Hazel, multiple rock slides, a missing person in the Corbin area, that name you gave. It is a cold file. It does not say recovered. I repeat, not recovered. No remains located. Not closed. Aislinn pressed the radio to her shoulder until the plastic complained. Copy. Can you send scans to my phone? I'm heading down to the Corbin Run access. If anyone else is close enough to meet, let them know. There was a pause, a little breath that was not static. Karen's voice softened a shade, the way people do when the past finds a way to ask for your time. Sending now. Watch your footing, the trails are a mess of marbles with the leaves down. Want Dupre from Hazeltop on, stand by. Affirmative. Aislinn slung the pack across her back and looked once more at the ridgeline. A truck from Fleet rumbled past, the driver lifting 2 fingers off the wheel in that rural benediction. Clouds had started as a rumor and were now themselves. The Corbin Run access was a gravel pull-off hidden beneath tulip poplars that had learned to whisper. Aislinn eased the truck in sideways and cut the engine. She took the trail with her boots, making small promises to each rock. The stream voiced itself down the hollow knit of last week's rain and this afternoon's melt of a single stubborn snowpatch in a shadow under a ledge. The map told the story of the lower springhouse, a square of stones where water had been convinced to behave. Above it, a ledge with a scatter of quartz chips, the leftovers of older hands doing older work. Aislinn kept an ear on her radio and the other on the creek. She caught the place where a trail forgets itself and becomes deer. She found the old springhouse, its stones asking to be counted. She touched the edge of the low wall with the kind of gentleness reserved for quilts and engines. She did not say the boy's name. The afternoon pulled its shoulders in. The radio breathed again. Same cadence, same careful voice. Fox Hollow base to any unit on the east slope. Child missing. Harlan Whitcomb. Last seen near Stone Spring House above Corbin Run. Weather degenerating. Request all available. Time is 16:30. October 14, 1954. Aislinn shivered in the warm air. Her eyes went to the spring house and its square of shadow. She moved the beam of her headlamp across the stones, not because she expected to see anything, but because light can sometimes rewrite a sentence the land is trying to say. The beam found a length of rust half buried in the moss along the back of the foundation, thin as a butter knife, with a clip and a circle at one end. She crouched. A whistle. Army surplus by the look of it. She teased it free, the moss unwilling to let it go. The metal had pitted and softened into a river-colored thing. She wiped it once against her sleeve, then regretted the act. Her radio clicked and made a sound she had not heard in years, a squelch from another era. Karen came back on. Keats. Dupre is on the way from Hazeltop Tower, 20 minutes if the drive is kind. Archives show the boy was last seen by his father near the spring house, yes. The father left him to fetch his jacket from the car. Weather shifted, heavy gust pushed through, child gone when he returned. Tracks lost near the ledge above the run. 2 days of cruise, then Hazel brought the flood and they stood them down. The file has letters from the mother, 2 years after, asking if anyone found anything she could hold. Answer stamped no. Aislinn looked at the whistle in her hand, then at the spring that fed the run. The water wore a sheen of leaves thin enough to count. She keyed the mic. Found a whistle near the spring house. Will bag it. Doubt it has any forensic value after 6 decades, but a photograph might matter to someone. As she spoke, a figure eased out of the trees upstream. A man in the brown and green of a ranger uniform, but the cut of it was wrong in a way you can feel even if you do not have the words. The shirt had pockets like ideas, the hat sat stiff as a rule book, he carried a strap radio that looked like a lunch pail with an antenna. He exhaled, then stopped when he saw her. "Ma'am," he said. There was a formality in the syllables, like church on a day that hurt. "We're sweeping the east slope." The boy's father said he was right here. He pointed at the stones, as if pointing could anchor the earth. Aislinn stood very still. The man's face had the smoothness of someone who had not yet had reason to learn what whiskey was for. His name tag said M. Elwood. His shoulder patch bore an American shield with a tree she did not recognize. He glanced down at her radio and then at the whistle in her hand. "You with us?" he asked. "You with Fox Hollow?" Aislinn's throat did the dry swallow of a person whose mind is faster than her words. "Yes," she said, because yes was easier than telling a man with a lunch pail radio about the word digital. "I heard your call." "Where are your lines?" "At the ridge," he said, puzzled by the question. "We got men cutting sign along the deer trails. We got women at base keeping track of names. The disaster man out of Charlottesville told us Hazel will give us until dawn and then gone." He looked past her to the ledge, his jaw a small square against the warm air. "Mother is at the church in Syria, not the far one, the one with the bell rope that sticks. She keeps asking if he had a jacket. She wants the question to be a fact." A gust moved through the trees on some business of its own. Aislinn felt the air change around the bones of the rocks. The man looked at her again, and the little muscle at the corner of his mouth twitched. "Your radio," he said. "You get this out to anyone else." "Yes." "We have a tower at Hazeltop. They know. Someone is coming." "Good," he said softly. Then he put 2 fingers to his brow. an old salute done halfway because distance is difficult to respect when the ground is asking for more of you. He stepped past her, boots exact on the damp leaves, and moved toward the ledge, listening with his face. He put a hand out as if to feel a draft. His outline lightened as if the warm air had decided he belonged to it. The forest made the sound of a coat hem brushed along a pew. He was gone. Aislinn stood, her hands empty now that the whistle had weight inside a bag. She did not call after him because naming a thing makes it pick a room and leave all the others. She climbed the slope above the spring house, careful, testing each foot. The ground showed her where it had let go before. The soil had slumped sometime between 1954 and now a scar that trees had tried to stitch. She scoped along the edge and thought about the father leaving for a jacket, a boy with a whistle and a spring that talks even when wind tells it not to. Dupre's SUV nosed into the pull-off as the last of the light left, and the storm made its speech. Jericho Dupre had shoulders like a doorframe and a way of stepping onto ground as if asking permission. He carried 2 headlamps and a calm that turned wind into a task rather than a threat. "You heard it too," he said, by way of greeting. "I did, twice. Then it came again down at the spring house. I found this." She held up the bag. The whistle swung on its string, dull as an old firmament. He took the bag and looked as if it could tell him how to think. He listened. The wind pushed down the hollow. The radio hissed, then thought better of it. He nodded at the ledge. "If it were mine to write," he said, "I would say, slip." The file says gusty before hazel. A child with a small sense of infinity walks the line twice to see if the sound changes along the water. It does. He steps where the deer stepped, and the hill remembers it owes the river a favor. Aislinn told him about the ranger with the lunch pail radio. Jericho had been in the park long enough to have a story for everything and to respect none of them fully. Fox Hollow was an unofficial name for the old maintenance yard near Syria in the 50s. He said, the way a person does when they are agreeing with the possibility of a ghost to be polite. There is a cinder pad there with the marks of 4 posts, like a tower. The radios would have been handsets the size of a Bible that could make clouds sound like news. People back then wrote reports thick with nouns. They did not trust adjectives unless a man had bled. He held the bag with the whistle for an extra breath. He set it in his crew pocket. They searched until rain made the ground decide to be a different kind of ground. In light from their headlamps, the trees stood at attention, counseling caution. They ran a short line grid above the ledge, more to be able to say they had used the dark well than because they expected the earth to give up a long-ago truth for free. At 9, the radios called them home before the lightning made the argument personal. Karen met Aislinn at the office with a printout. The file had been scanned, crooked, and the edges were black, where the copier had tried to keep history from fraying. The incident commander's name was printed in a firm hand, M. Elwood. A note in the margin had been added later in pencil. Mother moved to Luray in 67, father deceased, no closure letter sent. The pencil note was signed with a small initial A and a dot. Aislinn slept at the bunkhouse with the radio on her nightstand like a dog. She dreamed that paper flapped along a clothesline strung between trees, and she walked the line, reading every letter, her feet lined up on the rocks of the run, the paper turning to leaves as she read. At 3 in the morning, she woke to the noise a storm makes when it finally accepts its job. The world beyond the window went white, then black, then white again. She turned the volume down to half. She watched the rain write gloss on the sill. The radio stayed quiet. At 10, the day pulled itself together into rags. Aislinn drove down to Luray to a blue house where the porch had a swing, and the swing had 2 cushions that had learned how to be rain. She had a name from the file and a phone number that still worked, to her surprise. A woman in her 80s opened the door with the careful welcome reserved for officials who might be good news or could be kind even if they were not. "I am Aislinn Keats," she said, ranger with Shenandoah. "I am here because a storm pulled a thread and we saw where it ran." The woman corrected her posture and straightened the collar of her cardigan as if a story would take her picture. "My name is Tilda Whitcomb," she said. "We did not know how to leave him there, so we stayed." I have a loaf of banana bread that forgot the raisins on purpose if you are the kind of visitor who does not mind crumbs. Aislinn sat at a round table so clean it looked like a rule. The banana bread was honest, the tea was strong. Tilda put her hand on the tablecloth and kept it there as if the cloth would be steadier if it knew she was not going anywhere. She said the name Harlan like a stake you drive into ground so the tent knows where to stand. He whistled 3 notes, Tilda said. The tune the train plays when it comes into Luray, because his father used to take him to the crossing and they would wave at the men who stand like saints. 3 notes and then he would laugh because he was practiced at laughing. The wind took the notes and did not give them back. My husband ran to the car and the sky changed. They told him on the radio he had until morning. You can live your whole life in a sentence like that. Aislinn put the bagged whistle on the table. The string looped like a sleeping thing. Tilda did not reach for it. She looked at it as one looks at an old photograph that has learned how to move. I did not get a letter, she said, and smiled small to prove she was not accusing. I understand how papers behave. I was a clerk before my hands forgot to love the carbon paper. I suppose I wrote a letter in my head every day for 2 years. Then I stopped asking out loud. You cannot keep asking the same question without turning into a different person. The whistle sat, silent, older than most of the kitchen. Tilda looked out the window and the window looked back. A red cardinal landed on the feeder and told everyone, rudely, that it had arrived. Tilda laughed at the bird, and the laugh made her look like a photograph of herself. Aislinn asked about the ranger named Elwood. Tilda's eyes softened. Martin Elwood went to our church, she said. He was the kind of man who knocked on the door with his hat in both hands. He brought us a bag of oranges at Christmas and apologized as if the oranges had failed to be children. He wrote the report because that is what he could do, and he built a cinder block box for the tower that was not a tower, and then he got quiet like men do when they find out the world can keep a thing from them and they still have to go to work. Back in the truck, Aislinn let the radio hum. Big Meadows asked Pinnacles to send a set of cones to mile marker 62. A bear stared down a minivan with an intensity that made the parents breathe like swimmers. Life had resumed its insistence. She turned the truck toward the old maintenance yard near Syria, the one Jericho half remembered as a place with 4 posts and a name more rumor than rule. There was a cinder pad there for sure, now half invaded by chickweed and ambition. Someone had collected beer cans along the edge and arranged them by brand into a timeline. Aislinn walked the perimeter and crouched at a corner where the concrete had spalled enough to show a rebar smile. She brushed the dirt aside with one hand. A penny lay there. The year was 1954. She laughed, because a park and a story will sometimes give you too many symbols and you have to choose which to be corny about. The wind rose toward evening. The radio stayed in this decade, obedient and dull. Aislinn drove the ridge road, watching the color slide toward Bruce. Back at the office, Karen handed her a thin envelope with a stamped return address that made Aislinn's scalp feel like it had learned something. It was from an amateur radio club in Harrisonburg, a man who had heard the show Aislinn, sometimes called During Slow Nights, the one where listeners told stories of radios hearing the wrong things on purpose. We pick up oddities when the weather steeps the air, the man had written. Old distress calls, ham tests bounced off airplane wings, bombers from the 40s practicing. Once, a train dispatch from 1960 rolled through on a rain so thick you could chew it. There are names for this, and none of them explain it. The way I think of it is this. Time breathes shallow near storms. If a voice was loud enough once and the same air returns, you might hear a ghost that is not a ghost. Not dead, not alive, just not finished talking. That night, Aislinn drove down to Corbin Run one last time with a single job. She stood by the spring house and held the whistle. She did not put it to her lips because it belonged to a mouth that had done its work. She set it on the stone in the square of water smell and said a sentence Tilda had given her permission to say. Harlan, your mother sits with a red bird and forgives the form and the weather. We leave you where you are, not lost now. We know the place that held you. We will name it, even if the stone refuses to. Thunder argued with a ridge to the west. Aislinn picked up the whistle, tucked it back into the bag, and snapped the bag shut the way you close a letter you cannot ignore any longer. Her radio breathed and then found words. Fox Hollow Base to any unit on the east slope. Search secured. Weather has moved us. We will resume when it lets us. Families headed to shelter. If anyone finds a whistle, mark the spot. End of report, October 14, 1954. Aislinn lifted the handset to her mouth and did not speak. The silence she chose felt like respect, not fear. She held the radio until the voice faded into the music of rain. Then she climbed the hill back to the truck. The park wrote its own ending. Winter stripped the ridge to bones. Spring came with its first honest green. In May, a blowdown above Corbin Run sent a sycamore through the soil like a spoon and revealed a ledger of stones that had not seen light since Eisenhower. A student volunteer named Leda, working off a citation from a noisy night, found 2 marbles wedged into the roots where the ground had been a child's pocket. One was blue as the ridge on a clear day. One was green as a first leaf. They were bagged, labeled, cataloged. The ranger who filled out the form wrote found near the old stone spring house, Corbin Run, coordinates to follow. The park historian wrote a small note and signed it with a letter that looked like an A and a dot. Aislinn drove to Luray with the marbles and the whistle and a copy of the incident report with Martin Elwood's name on it. Tilda put her hand flat on the table again. She looked at the marbles and did not touch them. She touched the paper instead, the ink, the line that said, "Weather degenerating." She said Harlan's name until it stopped feeling like an apology. She picked up the whistle, finally, and put it to her ear as if listening to metal were a normal thing, and perhaps it is. Some evenings after that, if you drove Skyline Drive near mile marker 47 and rolled your window down, you could feel a warm breath slide into your car even when the air was sound and cool. It was not spooky, it was geology and a mistake and a memory. At the spring house, a ranger tied a ribbon to a low limb that matched the color of the marbles, bright enough to be seen and quiet enough to be ignored by anyone who did not need a reason to pause. The ribbon got replaced each year by whoever remembered. Martin Elwood's name found its way into the little museum at Big Meadows on a card next to an old lunch pail radio and a photo of the old Fox Hollow cinder pad with 4 ghostly post holes. Next to it, a thin slice of paper, a carbon copy of a letter whose original had been lost. The letter said, "Dear Mrs. Whitcomb, we are sorry we did not find your boy to bring him home. We did not stop looking until weather and hope told us to stop. He was last seen by the spring house that feeds Corbin Run. If you come to the park, a ranger will show you the stones." The letter was signed in a hand that did not know how to be neat and still be sincere. M. Elwood. Every now and then, on the radio, in the kind of weather that puts a lid on the hollows and makes the ridgelight a ghost, Aislinn would hear a wash of sound that reminded her of a man with a careful voice calling to his crew. She never keyed the mic until it faded. She let the air finish its sentence. She would step out of the truck and breathe the warm breath held in the cut. She would look toward the run that kept talking to the river under the leaves. She would say what she had learned to say when a story meets a place and refuses to end, just because the people in it have "thank you quietly" to the air. Then she would drive on, a little slower than before, as if a child were walking along the edge of her attention and she had decided to step back from the edge too. If you are listening from a place where the weather is steady, imagine a ridge crouched under a storm and a voice from a year you have to say out loud, not with numbers, but with breath. 1954. Hazel. Fox Hollow. A boy with a train's 3 notes in his mouth. A ranger with a lunch pail radio who pressed his fingers to his brow as if holding in his head all the ways a hill can keep a thing. Imagine the way a whistle feels in an old hand. Imagine the way a mother sits at a table and forgives a paper for being paper. Imagine the square of stones where water has no choice but to tell you where it is going. Then, tonight, when your own house makes its old noises and your clocks tame the hour into a number, let 1 minute expand for a voice that is not finished. Listen the whole time. Let the warm air pass across your face and do not name it. When it is done, say thank you and mean it. Then go to sleep. The hills will keep watch. The radios will behave until they do not, and even then, what they bring may be kinder than you fear. Her phone pinged at a grave with her name. The notification bloomed on her screen the moment her shoes left the gravel and slid onto the soft path between moss-dark stones. A small bell chime, bright as glass. A banner at the top. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. The words sat there as calmly as a weather app, as if the city had decided to label her the way it labels a bridge or a square. The place was Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. Spanish moss hung in long, steady sentences from the live oaks. The river kept its secrets behind the bluff and breathed like a sleeping room. It was late afternoon on a Sunday in early November, the air cool enough to make her wish for sleeves and warm enough to forgive her for forgetting them. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Edeni Hale, 28. She worked in visitor services at a small maritime museum upriver, the kind of job that made her memorize the angles of ships and the dates when storms came ashore. She liked fonts and quiet, and the sound salt makes drying on stone. She was visiting Bonaventure because her friend Anson had flown in from Minneapolis for a long weekend, and the two of them liked places that let you feel your breath in your mouth. The year was 2021. Phones knew where you were within decent intimacy. Some headstones wore small plaques with codes that asked to be scanned and promised a story. They had parked on Bonaventure Road under an oak that had learned to be older than most houses. The sky was simple, a clean coin of light. The volunteer at the office had given them a paper map and a soft-voiced list of locations worth the walk if you wanted your day to hold. Look for the little angels facing east. Find the section where the camellias keep blooming against instruction. There's a family plot that feels like a room you shouldn't step into without knocking. No one mentioned a notification. Edeni stared at her phone. The banner did not give a location like Section F or Plot 31. It was the same tag her calendar used when she arrived at work or home. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. As if she were a place. As if the grave were her. Anson leaned toward the screen and squinted. He was tall and light-footed, a teacher of high school literature who carried poems in his pockets like receipts. He read the banner and then her face and made a small arranging motion with his hands, the way he does when he wants to place humor where fright is trying to sit. That's a bug, he said, not unkindly. Or a geofence you made and forgot. Did you tell your phone to remind you to be yourself today? She clicked the banner to see where the phone thought she belonged. A map opened, a blue dot pulsed with the steady patience of a small heartbeat. A gray pin sat 100 feet east in a section labeled McAllister. The pop-up bubble above the pin read Edeni Hale in the same unsentimental font. She did not have a virtual contact called a cemetery. She had not created a reminder to arrive at her own name. The phone had decided the path curled between stones with dates that made you speak them out loud, because numbers are easier to hold when they come through the mouth. 1873, 1920, 2009. The Oaks leaned as if sold on the idea that the living need rehearsal space. Anson spoke a tour fact about a poet who loved this place and whose plaque visitors touch in a small, quick superstition. Edeni nodded because liking facts is a way of staying steady. Her pocket shook again. Another chime, the same banner. You have arrived, Edeni Hale. She breathed the way the yoga teacher on the internet tells you to. In through a count of 4, hold for 4, out for 6. They followed the path east until the bluff opened its shoulder and let the wind test their sleeves. The section ahead was a little higher, a little more sure of itself. A plot enclosed by low stone, dressed in ivy, sat beneath a live oak that looked like a table that had decided to grow legs. In the center stood a headstone gray as rain, taller than Edeni's shoulder. The name at the top held Edeni Hale. She stopped. You might have stopped too. Her name was not common. Her mother had found it in a book of Old English names and liked the way it sounded like a promise made under a tree. She had never met another Edeni. To see the letters in this order on stone felt like stepping into a movie where you have lines you did not audition for. Anson's hand found her elbow without a show of it. He had the sense not to say, wow, or are you kidding? He stood with her and let the river finish a sentence neither of them had started. The dates carved below the name were the first clean relief, 1974 to 2014, not hers. A woman 2 decades older, gone 7 years now. Under the dates, a line that read as Keeper of the Keys. The stone carried a small oval of glazed photo, a face with hair tucked back, eyes steady, a glint of a key ring at the edge of the frame. The oval was rubbed to a shine from fingers, the way love polishes small things while refusing to say it is love. On the right-hand corner of the stone, someone had bolted one of the new plaques with its little square of patterns. Scan to learn more. People who love story cannot resist a square that holds one. Idani lifted her phone and let the camera see. A link opened without asking for anything. A page built by a memorial service company bloomed. At the top, the name again. Below, a small biography. A life lived with habits, upright and kind. A childhood in Chatham County. A long run as cemetery sexton. The last line read in a voice that felt like a woman sitting on a step with a mug and a warning and a grin. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. While she read, the phone hummed again. Not a banner this time. A little circle pulsing at the top of the screen, the way maps announce a place with enthusiasm. The circle flashed once, then settled. Idani swiped down to see the source, a calendar reminder with no category. White, titled simply, Arrived. Location, here. She had not written that. The phone, perhaps, had decided the day needed a label, or the small plaque had more to it than the page admitted. Anson said the woman in the photo had librarian eyes. He meant that as a compliment. He pointed at the key ring. He said his grandmother had been a keeper of the keys at a church in North Dakota, and those women know where every grief sits at every hour, the way a night janitor knows which chairs spit gum and which ones sigh. They stood a while. People walked past in respectful silence, guided by a docent's voice that held just enough theater to keep 15 people from wandering into their own daydreams. Spanish moss moved like thought repeating itself. A flake of light rose off the river and fell back as if it had changed its mind about being air. It would have been a good story already finding your own name on stone, a phone that had the audacity to tell you you had arrived, but something else decided to be true. A little tone sounded from the phone, the way sounds do when an app you forgot you had decides to help. It was the noise her AirDrop made when someone nearby wanted to share a photo at inopportune moments. The screen shifted to a dialogue. A file offered to send itself to her. The sender name was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing. The file name read Keys. Anson leaned in and made his face calm. Decline, he said gently, because strangers in public places with quick hands make tricks, and both of them work in museums and have seen every version of the human habit of testing boundaries. She hovered. Decline would be wise. Accept would be a dare. She pressed accept because sometimes you let stories finish what they start. The file downloaded. It was not a photo, it was an audio file, a minute 42 in length. The waveform showed it wasn't silence. She tilted the phone toward her own ear instead of speaker, because you don't open a voice in a cemetery loud unless the voice has earned the right. Static first, then the sound of wind combing something thin, then a woman's voice, the age of a woman, who tells tools where they belong and expects cooperation. The voice said, dry as a towel and warm as a summer kitchen. If you are standing over me, child, and your name is mine, you can help me keep my promises. Put your phone on the stone and leave it be a minute. It will tell you where to stand next. Anson's eyebrows did a small jazz riff and then tried to behave. Okay, he said softly, a word that meant, I am here and I am not going to ruin this with cleverness. Idani set the phone on the flat top of the headstone the way the voice had instructed. The screen slid into its lock. Her reflection replaced her. The oval photo looked past her shoulder the way old photos always do. She counted in her head as a way to keep the childish fear of being tricked from standing up and knocking the ritual with its elbow. 50, 60, 78. The phone buzzed once, she lifted it. The map opened of its own accord. The blue dot had moved nothing. The gray pin had changed. It labeled another grave 30 yards north with a name neither of them had seen on the paper map. Rosin Hale. A second name. Another Hale. The first name was Welsh and not common here. They went because the day had asked enough times to be answered polite. The second stone stood lower, more modest. The granite, a color you could never find on purpose if you looked in a catalog. The dates were older, 1931 to 1999. The epitaph read, "She kept the gate lighted," and under that, in smaller letters, so faint you could only see them when the cloud put its hand over the sun, a line, Rosine was born. Rosine Idris. She married into Hale and stayed. Tell my niece if she comes through here that I see her when I count keys. I am not anybody's niece, Idini said aloud, and then took a breath because she heard the defensiveness squirreled underneath. I mean, not hers. You might be more people's niece than you know, Anson said gently, a man who had grown up with uncles who weren't uncles and yet were more family than the kind that wears your face. They stood while the wind added a signature to the bottom of the page of the day. The river put its shoulder against the bank and leaned. The phone did not ping again for a while. A cardinal went from one branch to another with the purposeful speed of a person who knows where the parts are stored. A group of teenagers trailed an auntie through the lanes, popping gum in a respectful way, which is a regional miracle. Idoni looked up Rosin on the cemetery's database because when your heart gets odd, facts make a braid to hold on to. The database was one of those volunteer-built websites that carry the tone of a potluck where everyone brings a dish so exact it shames you for choosing salad. Rosin's entry was thorough. Born Rhonda Valley, came across with parents as a child, settled in Chatham County, married one Mr. Hale, worked checklist after checklist for the electrical union office, sang alto in church with the patience of an anvil, survived by no children, preceded by older brothers, all gone. Niece mentioned in an obituary in 1999 with no name given. Anson made a sound that meant the story had wiped its hands on his shirt and was ready to cook. The phone chimed once more, now with the tone her museum app uses when a beacon in an exhibit hands you a fact. She had turned beacons off last month because being interrupted by history while in history felt a bit like a stage whisper in a quiet theater. She had not turned beacons back on. The screen read, "A note is waiting." A map pinpointed the little brick building the cemetery uses as a workshop for the grounds crew. A path drew itself in blue between the Hales and the shop, like a string in a child's game. They went because keys that ask to be found deserve not to rust. The door to the shop was propped with a cinder block the way doors are propped everywhere when the weather learns to be useful. A radio played a station that chose old soul and occasional baseball score updates. No one was at the counter. A bell stood there anyway, the kind that rings a sound like a glass penny. Anson rang it because he likes participating in obvious rituals. A man in his 50s with a badge that read August came in from the back, wiping his hands on a rag that had earned its keep. "You folks need a map?" he asked, then took a longer look at their faces and revised. "Or a minute." "We were by the Hale Stones," Idoni said, and watched the way a man looks when a rhyme finds his ear and tells him it cares. August nodded. "Course you were," he said. "I keep an envelope for that family. Been waiting on who it's waiting on." He reached under the counter, where drawers have learned to hold what should not be lost, and brought up a large yellow envelope with a blue paperclip that had rusted a little by choosing weather. The envelope had 3 words on the front in tidy block letters. For the next Idoni, heat went across her face like an honest light. August saw it and stilled. He handed her the envelope the way people hand one another babies, meaning well and moving slow. She opened it with her thumb. Inside, 3 items. A small brass key, old, not ornate, with teeth filed like a decision. A folded sheet torn from a spiral notebook, edges soft with years. And a wallet-sized photo of a woman in a blue work shirt with a name patch and a grin you could feel on your back like afternoon Sunday. The patch read, "Idoni." The face belonged to the woman on the first stone. The note was written in blue ballpoint in a hand that pressed harder than paper deserves. It read, simple. "For the next Idoni in this county who can hear me the way a key hears a lock." My niece is out there. She won't say yes to the word niece because words are stubborn. She'll need to open the box in the old mausoleum we keep for tools and favors. The key is for the small door on the left. Lift on the latch while you turn. The box has what belongs to her and me and her grandmother. If she is standing at my stone with a phone, she will know that I know. Don't bring a crowd. Bring one friend who reads instructions with his eyes. Leave the key when you are done. We can count without hands here. I'm not someone's niece, she said again, and heard how the sentence grew less certain with practice. Her mother's family tree began and ended in a different state. A line of women who told polite lies to spare one another the sharp edges and did their grief in broom closets. Her father had not survived long enough to name distant relations. He had left behind a bent screwdriver and a smell that her body still could find when a day asked. Anson's hand found the counter in a quick pat, like checking for keys as you leave the house. You don't have to be a niece to be the person meant to do a thing, he said. But also you might, and it might not matter how that happened. August tapped the counter twice, a habit that sounded like a yes. The small left door, he said. People never see it. Take the path behind the office and go right at the angel with the missing hand. The mausoleum is the little brick one that looks polite. The left door sticks the way a lie sticks to a room. Do what the note said, lift and turn. They went back into the light. The blue string on the map did not bother now to draw. The path knew their feet. The angel with the missing hand stood where the volunteer had said, "Angels stand, face east," blank expression that suggested she had witnessed every century and found nothing quite bad enough to frown at yet. The brick mausoleum waited with that small pride buildings have when they know they are not the grandest on the block, but are the one that does the job without complaint. The left door looked like a panel added later. The brass latch had the smoothness that comes of being touched by people who mean to get work done. Idani slid the key in, the teeth caught, and then thought better of it. She lifted the latch with her other hand and turned. The lock gave. The door opened 6 inches and stopped, ticked by a wooden wedge that had been insinuated at the bottom by someone who had not wanted the door opened by accident or habit. Anson reached down and pulled the wedge free. It had a date burned into it with a soldering iron. 2014. The year on the first stone. Inside was a closet of sorts, pegboards and hooks, a rake missing its second tooth, a coil of twine that had memorized its circle and would not learn a new trick, and on a shelf at eye level, a tin bread box with a domed lid, painted a green faded to the color of river glass. No lock. Written in the same blue hand on a piece of tape was a word: hail. She lifted the lid like a person lifts lids on boxes that might contain bees or inheritance. Inside, arranged with the blunt care of someone who never made a mess unless a branch fell where it shouldn't, sat 3 items: a narrow ledger with a black cloth spine, a key fob with 3 small brass tags stamped with numbers, and a folded paper bag, the kind grocery stores use for baking flour, rolled tight and rubber banded with an elasticity that made its own sound. She opened the ledger first because pages are her map. Names, rows of them, dates, locations in the cemetery with check marks where gates had failed and been repaired. Next to some entries, a small star. Those starred names also appeared on the little brass tags. Numbers, not random, not plot numbers, locker numbers. The cemetery kept a bank of lockers for the grounds crew in a shed she had not thought needed one. Her phone chimed in her pocket, a small suggestion from the maps. Direction nudged, left, then right. Then, would you like to add this location to favorites? She ignored the phone. The ledger asked for attention. On the inside back cover of the ledger, a note in different handwriting. Spare for Rosen's niece if she finds it. Locker 12 holds what isn't in the ground. If days are bad, tell the river. The river tells me. The tags on the key fob read 10, 12, 14. She ran her finger over 12 the way a person does over a scar. She felt nothing supernatural. She felt focus. Anson took the bag at her nod and unwound the rubber band. Inside lay 2 objects wrapped in butcher paper. He unrolled the first. A locket. Gold. Thin as luck. with a hairline crack, shaped like lightning, if lightning were careful. Inside, a photograph so tiny it could be breathed away if you weren't paying mind. A baby in a christening gown that had borrowed lace from a curtain. The face pinched in the way newborn faces pinch. On the back, in pencil that had migrated into the paper like a crop planting itself, a name. Rosen Idris Hale. A line below it, for my niece to hold if she comes to hear me. He unrolled the second. A county map from 1968, creased, the paper's fiber gone feathery at the folds. A road circled in blue pencil, a margin note. That old step bridge out by the waterworks. We left something in the middle beam in 74. If you can't find it, it means we didn't need it. If you can, well, you'll know. We are not going to a step bridge at dusk, Anson said. A man who loved old maps and also loved not getting in the paper under the wrong kind of headline. We are going to find Locker 12 while the Museum of the Dead is still on our side. They found the shed. August had seen their faces through the glass and met them halfway with the keys because some stories ask for a witness who knows better than to narrate. He led them to a wall of small metal lockers, each door painted the dull red of a barn that had not given up but had learned to pace itself. He unlocked 12 and stepped back. Inside lay a small stack of shallow boxes, each labeled with a date. The top was the 1, 2014. Under that, 2008. Under that, 1999. Anson lifted the top box and set it on a workbench. He opened it with care. Inside, wrapped in tissue that had become more suggestion than paper, sat a handful of objects that people keep for reasons the living should not pretend to understand quickly. A church key. A photo of 3 women, arms crossed, outside a union hall, one of them with a name patch that read R. Hale, a Polaroid of a red step bridge with water under it purling toward a bend. A handwritten note folded small. The note read, "For the niece who knows the word niece because keys hum when they find their door. You were not an accident. We kept count. We named you all the ways we could. Our names were soft and stubborn. Take what you want, leave the ledger so the ground does not have to work alone." She sat because standing felt rude. She is a woman whose mother did not tell stories with this kind of curve. She gathered the truth like thread. Her mother had been born in this county and left when she was 19, a bus to another state, a man met in a grocery line, a child years later when the idea of staying had become heavy. She did not talk about siblings, claimed not to remember cousins, flinched when the phrase back home came up. The name Hale had come not from romance, but from accident or choice, a name taken because other names insisted on being something else. Rosen Idris had married into Hale, but the family had been built long before that. Keys had been passed with and without rings. August stood with a posture that says, "I will not take your moment away from you." When the radio in the shed shifted to a weather update, he reached and turned it down so the forecast would not interrupt a storm already occurring. Anson put his hand flat on the bench and counted to 8 for no reason his body would confess. "Tell me if you want me not to read the other notes," he said. The kind of friend a person needs in rooms where both mystery and bureaucracy show up at the same table. "Read," she said. "We're already here." The note in the 1999 box was from Rosen and felt like laughter on a porch when the pots are already washed. "The house we put ourselves in is not one the county believes holds blood," she wrote. "But it holds me. And it holds the keys. If you need a name, the river has one. If you need a door, the shed does." In the box from 2008, a different hand, shakier, it read, "I kept the lights in the gate, all through the storms. I think sometimes we are simply the people who keep lights. If you are mine, you will know when to turn one on." In the box from 2014 was a letter from the sexton whose face smiled off the oval on the stone. She wrote like a woman who had lived by the kind of lists that get family through winter. "I have no children of my own except the Gates," she wrote, "but I have a niece whether the paper says it or not. I kept her not by being in the room, but by owning my stubbornness. If she stands over me with a phone and hears me, she will take what she needs and leave what she should, and I will go on counting with my hands in dirt like I like to do." They left the boxes as they'd found them, shifted nothing but air. August closed the locker with a satisfaction that felt like lining up the edges on a stack of bills and smoothing them down. He did not ask for anyone's story. He had one of his own, built of this place, and the line of names he keeps with the quiet grace of a man who waters plants. By the time they stepped back into the paths, the light had hunched into evening. The river sounded less like sheet music and more like a phrase repeating. The map on her phone had stopped suggesting anything and gone back to pretending it was an obedient device. The air smelled like river, camellia, and a penny someone had worried in a good pocket for a decade. Anson asked if she wanted to go to the step bridge. She said no, in a voice that held both sorrow and a plan. Tomorrow, in daylight, when names sit on surfaces more politely. He agreed because this is what friendship is, a committee about timing. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with the ledger borrowed under August's nod and the locket under her thumb. She called her mother. The call rolled twice, and then the voice she knew and loved and sometimes resented filled the line with wind and caution. They made small talk for 30 seconds, and then they moved somewhere they had not walked together. "Ma," she said, "who was Rosen? Who was Idony before me?" Silence, sincere. A kettle somewhere in the house. The refrigerator willing itself to be steady. Finally, her mother sighed, and the sigh sounded like a drawer allowed to close after being held open too many years. "My aunt," she said, "not by blood, by the kind of line people draw when the law does not help. She and the other one, the sexton, kept me safe when I was little and didn't know that my father wasn't safe to be around. They ran the lights in the cemetery and in the loose latch doors and told me when to lock things and when to open them. They were more my aunts than any of the few relatives that share me. When I left everything. I thought that was how you survive. I have not told you the parts you asked me about because I thought you'd want something tidier than I had, and because I am silly enough to think if I did not say the names, the ache would go to sleep." She told a story of a girl who sat on a stoop counting keys while two women kept a town's small doors in working order, literal and figurative. She told how those women had taught her to move through rooms with respect and to leave envelopes where they'd be needed. She did not speak tenderly about the man who invented the silence she had carried. She spoke tenderly about the other men, the ones who changed locks without asking why, and taught a child where the ladders were kept for days when rain insisted. "I should have told you," her mother said finally, soft with the fatigue of a woman who has not confessed a simple truth for a long time. "You have two names. The one I gave you, and the one the other women left for you to find when you were ready. You belong to both. You belong to yourself most." They went to the step bridge the next day. It was out by the old waterworks, just as the margin note had said. The county had let weeds try to become the principal of the place, and the weeds had accepted the assignment with poor posture and pride. The bridge stood, red paint scabbed into beauty, water under it moving with the impatient streams have when the river bullies them with schedule. In the middle beam, behind a square of metal the size of a book, a hollowed space. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper, a ring of keys on a chain that had learned 3 hands. Each key had a number: 10, 12, 14. The fob matched the tags in the box. Beside the keys lay a square of paper with a tiny handprint in paint the color of that old camellia behind the office. A child had been here once. She had pressed her hand down. Someone had saved it for a woman who would put her hand down later and understand they did not take the keys. She set her palm over the handprint. The sizes did not match. The feeling did. She closed the plate. She and Anson walked back to the car with the sun finding their shoulders and the hum of insects writing their own accurate dissertations on persistence. Back at the cemetery, she returned the ledger. August nodded like a man at the end of a good piece of work. She walked to the first stone and put 2 fingers on the glazed oval where the sexton's face had learned to look past tourists to the river. She did not speak. She let the ground and the river carry whatever needed moving. Her phone did not ping again there. It would ping months later, once in a grocery store aisle in a different city, when an older woman in a union jacket looked at her and tilted her head in a way that meant keys are a language. It would ping once again when she held the hand of a friend through a night much too long and heard as clearly as weather a voice say, "Lift and turn." It would ping at odd hours for the next several years when doors asked to be locked or opened with care. Sometimes it would be an app acting like a person, sometimes it would be a person acting like a map. Sometimes it would be a name arriving in a room with good manners and old roots. If you want the tidy ending, it is this. She wrote to the memorial company to ask who had access to the airdrop at the stone. No one answered in a way that satisfied anyone who cares about permissions. She kept the photo of the sexton in her wallet behind the museum badge and found that having a face like that near your ID keeps you from forgetting where the door to the stairwell is in a fire. She learned to count gates with her hands, the way women in that county had since the first lock learned the first habit. She took pies to August's workbench and listened to his stories. She phoned her mother on Sundays and let the conversation go long enough to find the sentence that mattered each week. She carried with her the sentence from the Oval's page. If you need something, tell the ground. It will tell me. If you want the less tidy truth, it is this. Sometimes your life is a geofence you didn't set. Sometimes you arrive at your own name carved in stone, and the stone says, "Welcome." Sometimes you are the niece of women who bent keys into new jobs and called that bending prayer. Sometimes your phone pings at a grave, and the ping is only a device doing what it was taught, and sometimes it is a noise a river makes when it is trying to talk through everyone's machines at once. If this happens to you, if you walk under trees that have learned the art of holding up clouds, and a little bell sounds in your pocket, and your name appears as a place, don't panic. Stand where you are. Read the dates out loud so the year will stop pretending it is only a number. Touch the stone with 2 fingers, not more. Listen for the voice that sounds like someone who knows where the ladders are kept. If a key is offered, lift and turn. If a door sticks, lift and turn. If a person asks for a niece, say the word niece like a new tool you know how to use. And when you leave, take the long path that wanders near the bluff. The river will be there keeping count. The oaks will be there practicing their patient grammar. Your phone will settle back into behaving. The ground will remember you, not because you are special, but because that is what ground does for people who treat it like a partner. Somewhere behind you, a bell on a worker's desk will ring, and a man named August will nod to no one and say out loud into an empty shed, "She arrived." Then he will sweep the floor in slow, exact strokes as if he were writing the names in dust and erasing them on purpose so the day could begin again and mean it. A hiker found a phone recording. The last minute, he found the phone just before dusk on a switchback above Blue Lake in the San Juan Mountains of southwest Colorado. It lay half buried in scree, face up, a spiderweb crack stitched across the glass, the red record dot stubbornly pulsing as if the device itself refused to look away from whatever it had heard. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The hiker's name was Ansel Rook, 33, a lineman from Pueblo who spent his days climbing utility poles and his weekends climbing whatever rose higher than his weekdays dared. It was late September 2021. The sky had that high-altitude rinse of cobalt that makes evergreen needles look sharper than they are. Below him, the water in the lake caught the last light and held it like a breath. Above him, a line of weather gathered beyond the ridgeline, thin-boned at first, then thickening into something like intention. Ansel lifted the phone with 2 fingers, the way you lift a bird that might be stunned but alive. The recording timestamp read 4:57 p.m. The battery icon showed 2%, then 1. He hesitated. The screen was smeared with a comma of dirt, the kind that comes from a palm skidding along gravel. He did not press play right away. He looked around first, because that is what you do when you find a thing that wants to tell you a story. You make room for it by seeing the place where the story happened. The switchback clung to an outthrust of talus and alpine grass, long blades moving in a wind that never quite became a gust. A cairn stood a little off the trail, too tidy to be natural, too thoughtful to be a prank. 2 boot prints were pressed into a patch of damp earth near the cairn, heel then toe, the kind of prints that happen when someone stops and leans forward for a better look at something that never asked to be looked at. Beyond that, the slope fell away into a tumble of shale and broken quartzite, a gray throat that could swallow a person without even needing to clear its own voice. He pressed play. First came footsteps, soft, measured, the sound of trail shoes finding their way over loose stone. Then, wind, not a roar, but a long vowel. A woman's breath, a zipper. The little chirp of a trekking pole knocking against a rock, and then being caught, steadied, forgiven. A far-off raven called once. Then, once again. The recording clipped and crackled, and then let the sound in wider, as if the phone had been lifted from a pocket. The woman's voice arrived next, not speaking to the phone, not to herself exactly, but to the place. Almost there, she said, and even in 2 words there was a smile you could hear. Another voice came in, thinner with distance, male, from above or beyond a switchback. Ansel could not see from his spot. Don't cut the corner. The tone was teasing, not scolding. It carried the kind of affection that worries by pretending not to. I know, the woman answered, and you could hear the grin get wider, as if she liked being told a rule she had already decided to follow. Ansel glanced up the trail. No silhouettes against the ridge, no packs leaning against a crumhole spruce, no motion that would explain a pair becoming 0. On the recording, the footsteps paused, the little metallic skr of a carabiner, a soft hum, tuneless and content, then a small sound that was not content at all. A pebble moving in a way pebbles do not choose for themselves, a slide that was also a decision. Hey, the man's voice said, quick now, and closer, and then there was skin and throat panic wrapped in one word, wait. The breath on the audio sped up, a severe silence followed, a silence full of edges, the way silence gets when it is about to be broken by something you cannot rewind. Then a single sound Ansel would think about later and later and later, a thump like a hand slapping the top of a piano closed. A gasp that turned into a half laugh, because sometimes the body does not admit the truth on the first try. A scrabbling, nails on stone, the phone fell or was dropped. The microphone scraped against the ground and filled the world with sand. Voices blurred, a name rose up out of the grit. Junia. The word was carried like a prayer someone forgot how to finish. More sliding, a shout that stopped without a period, a sound like a pack hitting and then being dragged. Then only wind. Wind and the long, small sparrow of a cry that arrived uninvited from very far down, which might have been a person and might have been granite learning how to speak. The recording ended because the battery couldn't pretend any longer. Ansel stood very still, the phone warm now in his hand, the way a telling is warm the second time through. He tried the word on his own tongue. Junia. He looked where the 2 boot prints ended and where the ground began to pretend it was a floor but wasn't. He approached the cairn and hated it for existing and thanked it for marking the spot all at once. He kneeled and saw the narrow, scraped shine a person leaves when their boot finds a path no one built for it. The first drops hit his neck. Big, impatient, high country drops that are not water at all, but announcements. He lit his headlamp early, not because he needed it, but because a cone of light sometimes manages the world better than a wide, honest dark. He pulled an orange bandana from his pocket and tied it to the cairn. He took 3 photos in a slow circle: ground, slope, lake, and the way the sky had folded its arms. Then he did the most useful thing he knew. He climbed down to cell range. The call to the San Juan County Sheriff rang once, twice, and then a voice that had said this greeting more times than it wanted to answered with a name Ansel would remember. Deputy Cale Morrow. Calm. Not bored. Ready. Ansel described it carefully. Coordinates from his handheld GPS, the audio, the voices, the shape the trail made where it almost shook hands with the slope and then thought better of it, the bandana, the weather, rumored by the sky. Stay off the fall line, Morrow said. Get back to Timberline if you can and wait for search and rescue to reach you. Do not go after anyone you cannot see. He breathed in a way that made the phone sound like a lung. We've had a call about a late return from the Blue Lake Spur today. Your timing is not unlucky. It is the clock we were already watching. Ansel did as he was told. He descended to the last stand of wind-shaved spruce and waited, the kind of waiting that hums through bone. He could hear the storm organize itself on the ridge. He could feel how the mountains wear weather like a mood, quickly, convincingly, and then change it without apologizing. Headlamps appeared in the first gray of evening, a cluster of steady stars moving with purpose. 4 figures and a 5th slighter one moving with the confidence of a person who knows where the rocks are even when the rocks won't tell you. The 5th lifted a hand. Her hood was down despite the wind. Her hair was braided tight to keep the night from borrowing it. "I'm Dory Keene," she said. "San Juan Search and Rescue. This is Micah, Jovan, Arthur, and Ren. You the caller." Ansel nodded and gave them the phone. Dory turned the volume up and held the device near her ear, head bent, eyes closing in that way people have when they magnify one sense by dimming the rest. The others listened too, the small team suddenly one organism. When the man said wait, their spines stilled. When the name rose, Dory's mouth pressed flat, not cold, not warm. Deciding, she handed the phone back and pointed. "Show me." They climbed in a line, the kind of line that knows which stones you can trust and which pretend to be trustworthy. The cairn found them. The bandana shivered in its small way. Dory crouched, laid 2 fingers on the scraped shine, and read it the way some people read Braille, asking for permission first. She looked down the slope, her eyes adjusted to a grammar Ansel did not speak. "We anchor here," she said. 2 down to the first ledge, 2 on belay, Ren with me at the lip. "You, Ansel Rook, you stay with Ren. If I tell you to move left, you move left." He swallowed, which tasted like metal, and nodded. The first thunder spoke. Not near, not far. The polite cousin of a threat. Rope hissed through gloves. Metal clinked with the bright sound mountain metal makes, a sound that knows at least 3 languages and prefers the most precise. Dory called down softly and answered herself when the wind was too busy to carry voices back up. 30 minutes grows very large when you cannot spend it on your own terms. The storm ignored them, and then considered them, and then walked away to another valley. The sky tried on a paler blue for a minute to see if it fit. Ansel watched a chipmunk watch them with the same fascination he felt. The animal had the kind of confidence that comes from being very good at running from everything. A shout made of 2 syllables rose from below, triumphant and careful at once. "Got one?" Dory closed her eyes for just long enough to speak without words to whatever listens up there. Then she called back. "Name." Micah's voice floated up, thinner than it should have been. "Junia. Alive." The sound inside Ansel's chest became something he had not realized he was holding back. He breathed it out in one steady line and leaned both palms into the earth, because you should always touch what keeps you from falling. They worked then. A litter arrived in pieces on shoulders and came together like an idea that had been there all along. Hands did what hands should do when someone needs to be lifted from one kind of gravity into another. They spoke to the person on the ledge in short lines. The way you speak to a horse you love and do not want to spook. "Junia, we have you. Junia, do you feel this? Junia, breathe in when I count to 3. We're moving on, nowhere but up." Rain made a sentence across the slope and then erased it again. The wind forgot itself and then remembered. A raven rode the air as if it had invented it. Ansel saw her when they came over the lip. She had the look of someone who had been negotiating with Stone and won, but did not yet dare to celebrate. Mid-30s maybe, hair the color of straw left in the sun, eyes that wanted to close and would not. Blood dried in a tidy line along her left temple. The right knee of her hiking pants was torn, and beneath it, angry purple began to write its name. A bracelet made of 2 woven cords circled her wrist, one blue, one green. The blue was frayed as if teeth had once worried it during a long night. She looked at Ansel first, not because of anything he had done, but because his face was the closest one when the world came back into focus. Her voice was rough from cold and prayer. "Did you hear it? Did you hear me call him?" He did not know who him was, and it did not matter. "Yes," he said, as if yes were a kind of bandage. "We heard you. We came." They moved her in the neat, practiced way people move someone who is more precious than anything else in the room. The rope line looked like music from a distance. The lightning threatened to tune its instruments and then decided not to play. The litter found the shadow of the pines and then the steeper shadow of the trail through meadow. 2 miles became an hour. The trailhead arrived with the small surprise a finish line always carries. A white truck from the county waited, engine narrating its own faithfulness. A paramedic named Orrin Hux set hands on Junia with the kind of competence that makes even pain look smaller around the edges. He asked her name to ask her other things. Junia Ridge, she said. 35. From Albuquerque. Came up yesterday. Intended to camp. Yes, I was with someone. He was up the switchback. It was our second turn around the lake. That's his phone. She watched Ansel put the device into Orrin's outstretched palm and then closed her eyes because the world was too heavy to carry all the way open. Orrin asked the question that had to be asked. Where is he? Junia shook her head once, a small, broken metronome. I don't know. I slipped. He yelled. I caught the ledge. I don't know. Dory stood with her back to the truck and looked up at the ridge. Even from the trailhead, she could read the day along the stone. She spoke into the radio with the language that belongs to people who need updates to be short and full, second subject unaccounted, male voice on recovered audio, last known above Blue Lake Switchback 2, weather marginal, lightning east. Request second team from Telluride side if available, plus 1 dog on dawn, copy. It was full dark when the second team arrived. Headlamps stitched the slope like fireflies, convinced they were surgeons. The dog named Pallas, coat black as a charcoal drawing that had learned to move, took the scent from a hat Junia had kept tucked under her hip belt. The dog read the ground like an old friend's letter. Up to the cairn, left where the trail pretends it is a suggestion. Down 3 shelves of stone, some people would call cliffs, and other people would call arguments. Then the animal stopped, sat, whined once, and put its chin on its paws. They found nothing that night. Not nothing in that cruel sense, but nothing you could put your hands on and say this belongs to him. No pack, no trekking pole, no hat. No snack wrapper with a name in tidy black letters like a first day of school. The mountain held its tongue. Morning came with a sky made of tin and apology. They went again, Pallas worked again, Wren set anchors again. Micah called in a voice that refused to become thin. Ansel was sent home because there is a point where more bodies become less help. He drove south toward Durango, the road curling along the Animas River, cottonwoods just beginning to try on their gold. He listened to the recording once more in the motel parking lot, sitting very still, as if any motion would knock truth out of the speakers. Junia woke in a bed that had rails and numbers and beeps. 2 things lived in her body now, pain and the certainty that she had not imagined the second voice. The nurse wrote her name on a whiteboard that greeted morning patients like a cheerful aunt. Junia. The day. The plan. The surgeon's name with its syllables arranged like fence posts. Deputy Cale Morrow came in late morning. He had the kind of careful that does not pretend it isn't careful. He set a small gray recorder on the tray table with the gelatin cup and did not move it closer to her as if it were a burden. He asked permission. She nodded. He asked again because some nods do not mean yes. She said yes. He pressed the button and spoke the words aloud the way people do when they want to make the world behave. Interview with Junia Ridge. Date, time, present, she told him. The way the weather had looked all day like a bluff, and how bluffs tire themselves out eventually. The man she had met at the trailhead that morning when she realized she'd left her stove fuel on the driver's seat back in town, and he had said without flinching, I have more than I need, take mine. His name was Orrin Bale. Not a common name which helped the telling and hurt the hurt. He was 39, maybe 40. He had the kind of smile that makes coffee taste the way it ought to. He had the kind of pace that lets conversation sit down and stay a while. He had his sister's dog and a photo on his phone and had not tried to pretend it was his own. He had said it was his first time above 12,000 feet since he was a boy and that the air was thinner but his head felt clearer and wasn't that funny. She had not planned to hike with him. They had both headed out early to beat the thunderheads that never quite decided to arrive. They crossed the first creek together because rocks are often friendships in disguise. They turned at the little waterfall, then again where the climb gets greedy. Somewhere near noon, they split. he to the saddle above the lake to look for ptarmigan, she to the outcrop on the western side where the blue looks bottomless and makes you feel the size of your own heartbeat. They regrouped by accident among a stand of willows that kept the wind in its coat. They ate together because food tastes better when someone else laughs at your almonds for being aspirational and you laugh at their gummy bears for being perfect. He offered the second loop around the lake, and she said yes, because saying yes is sometimes a way of agreeing with the day. And then the fall. And then the seconds that were longer than seconds. The name she tried to lace to him as if names were rope. The way the ledge held and then complained and then held again. The fact that there had been no shout that sounded like pain, only a shout that sounded like surprise, and then a long conversation between gravity and silence that ended with silence believing it had won, Cale listened the way people listen when they use listening as a tool. He did not say, "I am sorry," in the first 5 minutes, because sometimes sorry has to wait its turn behind words that can anchor an actual investigation. He asked for a description that could be drawn into a cruiser laptop sketch. He asked for the brand of the pack, the color of the jacket, the kind of hat. He asked if Oren had a habit of humming, joking, leaning to his left when he walked. Junia closed her eyes and watched the man step through the room her mind made of the trail. He hummed, she said finally, low, tuneless, when he tried to put a word to a story he had not told yet. He leaned into weather, as if weather liked people who leaned back. They searched 3 days. Helicopter on day 2, when the wind played nice, no body, no sign. The slope did what slopes do. It took the small and offered back the smaller, a strap end. A pocket knife that might have belonged to anyone. A grin of metal that once was a grommet. Nothing that knew how to clap its hands and say, mine. The internet made its murmurs the way it does. The forums filled with conjecture. The ones who have never been above treeline explain to the ones who have exactly how Talus works. A post from a cousin arrived in the kind of font grief chooses when it has to choose one. Have you seen him? Another from a person who knew a person who might have known him and wrote that he was the kind of man who never took the last donut. A stranger said, why was she with him at all, as if who walks beside you guarantees you a ladder back down. Dory Keene did not read the forums. She read the mountain. On day 4, she told Cale in a voice that allowed both compassion and math that if the slope had decided to keep him, it likely would continue to keep him until snow learned what it wanted to do and then taught them in spring. Cale nodded, his jaw set lazy and hard, the way the river sets a stone down and then decides where it lives. Junia went home to Albuquerque with stitches like commas along her hairline and a knee wrapped in instructions. She slept 4 nights without the part of sleep that heals. On the 5th night, she dreamed of blue water that did not know it was cold, and a voice saying, wait, in a tone of gentle impatience, as if wait were a surprise party she would like if she would just stop walking long enough to see the lights. Come on. Ansel went back to work. Poles. Wire. The logic of circuits. He found himself stopping on the shoulders of county roads to watch clouds interrogate a ridge and answer themselves with rain. He listened to the recording once more, then deleted it because a voice should be treated like a person's glove. Pick it up only if it is yours or if the person who wore it has asked you to hand it back. The snow came in late October, the way it comes in the San Juans, when it decides to be industrious. It buried the slope's grammar, it set down the season like a book a child might not be ready for. Thanksgiving arrived with a turkey that somebody had to carve whether they wanted to or not. December wrote its short letters, and January forgot to put a return address on anything. In early June of the next year, when the snowpack loosened its jaw, 2 things happened on the same day. At 11:19 in the morning, a pair of hikers from Montrose came down from the saddle above Blue Lake early because the sun had made everything overconfident and the heat on the rock had learned to be a lie. They paused near the outthrust of Talus, where a cairn had once worn an orange bandana and now wore nothing but its own small pride. A zipper glinted among the stones. The zipper was attached to a jacket the color of fog. The jacket was wrapped around the idea of a man. They did what the poster in the ranger station says to do when a finding stops being a finding and becomes a person. Mark the spot. Note the time. Back away in the exact steps you made arriving. Carry more silence than usually carry. Call. The second thing that happened at 1:27 in the afternoon occurred in a backyard in Albuquerque where the cottonwood shed its soft snow over a patch of lawn that wanted more water than the city wanted to give it. Junia's phone chimed. She looked down, thinking it would be the alert she still had not turned off for the county updates. Instead, there was a text from a number she had written down on a napkin and saved on purpose. It said only this: "We found him. Dory." Junia sat on the back steps and watched three ants perform a task more complicated than any she had been assigned that week. She did not cry because they had prepared her politely not to expect this. She did not smile because smiling was a verb her face had not practiced with that sentence. She pressed call and heard a voice that wore dust and care. Dory told her what could be told on a phone and promised the rest would be told face to face, because some tellings don't belong to towers and waves. A week later, Junia drove north, past Española, where the signs know two languages, past Abiquiu, where the river looks like it can't help but gather light, over the state line, that is a thought and a mile marker and a map all at once, into the San Juans, where the air remembers your first name and uses it. Dory met her at the small office with the big map and two chairs that had learned to carry tired people. Cale was there too. He set a folder on the table and did not open it until her hands rested on her knees, the way you rest a cup on a saucer. "We recovered MrBallen," he said, and the word recovered did not feel like anything except exactly itself. Two hikers saw the jacket. He left the trail at the switchback, slipped on the lip, and fell more than 30 feet to a shelf. The shelf kept him for winter. He likely died on impact. No signs of anything except the mountain doing what mountains do when you ask them to hold a human being. The autopsy says the thing autopsies say when physics chooses the verbs. She asked the question that had been living in her since the voice said, "Wait, did he speak after I slipped?" We can't say, Cale said. And then because the truth deserved a little mercy, he added, "The shelf where we found him was below your ledge, not above it." Which means his voice on the recording was in the seconds before you both stopped standing and started falling. After that, he would have been below you. If you don't remember hearing him then, that is your brain giving you a gift it knew you could not buy for yourself yet. Dory laid something on the table wrapped in a brown paper lunch bag. "We think this is yours," she said. "We found it lodged in a crack just above where you came to rest. It had become part of the mountain, but it was stubborn in a way that listened." Junia unwrapped the thing, the bracelet from her wrist. The blue and green cords had become one color winter makes. The frayed end had been burnt to keep the braid from unraveling and then worn down again by time. She turned it in her hand, thumb finding the place where the weave had learned her skin and made it a home. "He gave me this at the trailhead," she said. "He said he made two of them when he decided to stop drinking 3 years ago. He kept the green, he wore it under his watch. He gave me the blue because I said I had stopped apologizing for being careful the year before, and he laughed and said, 'That sounds like a thing worth marking.' We only knew each other a handful of hours. And yet," she closed her fingers, then opened them again. "Ansel Rook sent me the audio file. Did you know that?" He asked if it would help. I said yes before I knew the answer. It did not help, and it did. Both are true. They stood later at the trailhead. The mountains looked less like authorities and more like the long, patient elders they are. A breeze moved through the spruce in a way that would be mistaken for whispering if you were the kind of person who liked to be mistaken that way. Junia closed her eyes and saw the shelf she had not seen. She said his name once out loud and not loud, the syllables answered by not answering at all. They buried Orrin Bale in a small cemetery behind a church that had learned to be ecumenical because the weather didn't care which god you favored. His sister came with the dog whose photo he had shown. She spoke without paper, which meant her mouth borrowed words from the heart, and the heart forgave the mouth for not being tidier. Junia stood 2 rows back and pressed her fingers into the bracelet and found she did not have to press very hard to feel the world answer. Ansel did not come to the service because attendance is sometimes not the right way to honor a stranger you helped. He drove a route that took him past a ridgeline and paused in the pullout that locals use because it's theirs. He left his truck idling. He rolled the window down. A meadowlark said something with conviction and melody. He answered, "I hear you," and meant it. As summer leaned hard into itself, tourists thinned the trails with their curiosity and filled the cafes with their hunger. The blue of Blue Lake looked less like an opinion and more like proof. Dory kept her team on the same frequency, even on days when no one needed rescuing, because habit saves more lives than heroics. Kale kept notches in his days for the kind of paperwork no show has ever made look interesting. It was work. It mattered that it was work. Years later, in a living room in Santa Fe, Junia would set a phone on a table between two mugs and play the last minute for a friend who asked very gently to hear it. The friend would listen with eyes open, because some listenings deserve witness. In that small recording lived a hill, a sky, a woman, a man, a word made of 4 letters in air, and a sort of silence you learn to share with people you trust. When it ended, they would sit still long enough that the room would remember they were there and offer them back their voices. "What do you make of it?" the friend would ask, not to argue, just to let the world have one more chance to tell her what it thinks it is. That he said, "Wait," Junia would answer, and meant it kindly. That I said "almost there," and meant it with all my heart. That the mountain was not a villain and not a friend. That the cliff listened and then did what cliffs do. That the phone fell the way a witness sometimes falls and still did its job. That people who did not know me put a rope on and let me become part of their workday. That the second voice is a place in my head now where something can live without having to die again. She would hold up her wrist. The bracelet would have been replaced by another that looked very much like it and not at all like it, blue and green, new knots, same story. She would say, "I tell the mountains out loud now when I turn around. I say, 'See, this is me deciding to see you again.' And sometimes the wind says nothing back, and sometimes it says a sound that is not a word and still feels like one. Here is what does not always fit in the write-up. The last minute of a recording can keep playing long after the file ends. The man's wait can become a way to step out of traffic, to carry a ladder with a friend, to hold a door without trying to become the door. The woman's almost there can become a way to measure a good day, not by miles, but by a turn you made toward kindness when no one was checking your odometer. If you go to the San Juans, and I hope you do, look up. Say the names of the peaks, like they are elders you respect. Tell the sky you will be back before it begins to think about electricity. Pack a bandana, a bright color that could be seen from far away by a stranger who might need a small flag to make a big decision. If you find a cairn, leave it be unless a ranger told you otherwise. If you find a phone, do what Ansel did. Press play only after you have looked around. Then, if you must, listen. Hear the footsteps, the wind, the breath. The word that might be a prayer and might be a joke and might be both. Decide carefully what you will do with the minute you have been given. It will be late somewhere by the time you finish this. It will be early somewhere else. The country is wide and the mountains are quiet, and the phones we carry don't always know when to stop telling the truth. If tonight you hear the wind make a sound that asks you to wait, take one step back from the edge and put your hand on your own shoulder the way a good friend would. If tomorrow your trail offers you a second loop, say yes or no out loud so the day can hear you and keep its promise not to argue. And if the last minute ever finds you the way it found Ansel, at the exact space where listening became a kind of work, let your voice be the one that says, "We hear you, we're coming," then come.